Hey everyone, and welcome to WDIM News, my weekly podcast where I talk about sci-fi stuff and some other stuff. My name is Eric. Thank you very much for joining me. This week on the show, we're going to start as usual with my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Picard. Next, I thought I would go over some theories about what is going on this season on Picard that I got from the comment sections of my videos, along with an article I found online. After that, I want to talk about an interview with one of the stars of the Orville about the future of that show, and for once, it is good news. Then I want to talk about the first season of The Last of Us now that it's over, what I thought of it, and how popular it ended up being. I want to stay on the topic of popularity and discuss The Mandalorian and how its current season not only just had its worst rated episode ever, but that the viewer numbers are down as well. Which will lead into my final topic, which is to ask the question, has Star Trek Picard Season 3 been a success so far, now that we are halfway through the season? And when I say success, I mean both critically and how popular it is. So first, let's start with the 5th episode of the 3rd season of Picard titled Imposters. I'm going to go over spoilers, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, go watch it. You definitely should. It was a great episode, and then come back and watch this podcast. I will start with the things that I liked. First of all, of course, we got to talk about the return of Michelle Forbes as Ro Laren. I thought that was really cool. It wasn't a huge surprise. I mean, if you follow my channel, you already know that I put out a video about 8 months ago, I think. I kind of guessed at which characters from The Next Generation would be returning, and she was the first one that came to mind. So I'm glad that she got to return. It makes a lot of sense, especially in the later years of The Next Generation. She was not only an important character, she was a fan favorite, and she was very important to Picard. You could say that Ro was kind of the first kid that Picard tried to have. I mean, she didn't really have a family, and he didn't have one, so he kind of had a bond with her that he didn't seem to have with anybody else. Then, of course, Ro betrayed him in the second last episode of The Next Generation, which led to Picard, not trusting anyone again and not wanting to let anyone in because after he let Ro in, she did this to him. And, of course, in this episode, they're able to reconcile. I really liked how they were able to prove to each other that they weren't changelings by just talking about all the crappy stuff that they did to each other and how horrible it made each of them feel. I thought that was great. It was a great arc for her character for just being in that one episode, adding that she was the handler for Worf, of course, makes her more important to the season. It was a great return for Michelle Forbes. I like seeing that character. It was very moving, that ending that she had to sacrifice herself. I know I've seen a couple of people online say, we didn't see her die, we just saw the connection lost. I believe that she's dead. For the simple fact that if they didn't kill off Ro, it would just kill that scene, and that scene has so much emotionality to it. If you bring back the character and say, oh no, we got her out of the shuttlecraft in the last second, it really takes away from that scene. And I thought it was a great scene. So I hope they don't do anything with that. And I hope that she does, stay dead, as weird as that sounds. And it also begs the question, we heard from Terry Matalas that not all the stars from The Next Generation were safe. Was Ro the character that he was talking about, and will we not see any more characters die? I've been under the belief that Marina Sirtis's character, Deanna Troi, will be killed off in this season just because of some, different things that I've seen in the trailer and different comments that people have made. We haven't seen Marina Sirtis in live action, so to speak, so far. We've only seen her on view screens in 2 episodes, and one was in the past, so it wasn't even current. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's not going to be the one that gets killed off. But I'm sure, we're only halfway through the season. I'm sure we're going to see a lot more surprises. As far as returns go, it wasn't a huge surprise. Like I mentioned, I already put out a video a few months ago where I said that Ro would probably return. Michelle Forbes is still a working actress, so it makes a lot of sense for her to come back. A lot of these people that starred on Next Generation so many years ago aren't acting anymore, so it's hard to get them back in the swing of things, get in shape, stuff like that. So having Michelle Forbes come back makes a lot of sense, and seeing her character return was awesome. I also like, not just specifically in this episode, but this season, how we are seeing how the events that transpired on the Enterprise D, as well as Deep Space Nine to a certain extent, have affected the rest of Starfleet and the galaxy. These ships and station, I should say, don't exist in a bottle, and things have happened, and the legacy of Picard and Riker, we're seeing how all this stuff, has just had ripple effects across everything that's happened in Starfleet. We, of course, had Shaw say that, he served on a ship that was at Wolf 359 and that he met Jean-Luc Picard in battle when he was under the influence of the Borg as Locutus. We've already seen that on Deep Space Nine, of course, in that series premiere when Picard was confronted by Cisco, who also faced him at Wolf 359. So I like that. I like to see, how, this thing in this episode or this thing in this season affected this, and now we're here. I like seeing stuff like that. And we saw some of that in this episode, and we're definitely seeing that in this season, the legacy of these characters. Of course, that's what Picard is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about the legacy of the next generation. The creators of Picard said that they made the series so we could have a better send-off for these characters. That's why they killed Data again in the first season, because they didn't like how he was killed off in Nemesis. So, it makes sense that, that's what we're seeing. And I think it's really successful this season. I don't know that it's been as successful in season 2 and season 1, but I'm definitely feeling it this season. And I like that. I also liked in this episode that we saw more of Worf and Raffi. And I think this week I really figured out, with them being gone for an episode, the one before this one, and then coming back this episode, I like the change of pace that their story provides. Obviously it's lighter, even though they're killing people in every episode. It seems to have a lighter tone than, there's not as much tension between Worf and Raffi as there is on the Titan. And it's a good break. Michael Dorn is killing it figuratively and literally as Worf this season. And I like his, interactions with Raffi and, finding out that he was tied to Ro and Ro was his handler. I thought was really cool. It really tied a lot of stuff together. Made sense. It wasn't just, story fodder that was supposed to make fans happy. Oh, these characters met each other again. Like, it makes sense that, Ro and Worf both serving on the Enterprise, that Ro would trust Worf and that, Worf would trust Ro. I think I like the change of pace that we get. It kind of like when you go to a good steakhouse, you got to have a side too. You can't just have a ton of meat, and that's what we're getting with the main storyline on the Titan. It's just like a really good steak. But if you want a really good steak, you got to have something on the side too, like some potatoes or a crunchy vegetable or something, to mix up the texture and the flavors and stuff like that. And I think that's what we're getting with Worf and Raffi. They're like really good mashed potatoes on this plate of steak, and I really like them. And then finally, my last note on something I like on this episode was I like the Vulcan crime boss. Not just that I'm a fan of Kirk Acevedo. I've been a fan of his since Oz. He's been on a lot of shows that I like. He was a villain on Arrow, I know, at one point. And he's just one of those like actors that shows up all the time. He's got that really like deep voice that, it sounds like he's been smoking cigarettes since he was like 6 months old. So I liked how they introduced him from the back and he just started talking. And I knew even before they showed his face. And then the concept of a Vulcan crime boss, like that's really cool to me. And he even kind of works it out, how, utopia can't exist without crime. So ergo it's logical. Like I was just like, wow, he just dropped some knowledge on me. Like that was pretty cool. So I like that they're doing with that. And, I pointed out in my breakdown how he also has ties to 12 Monkeys and Aaron Stanford, who was the character Sneed earlier this season. You should definitely be watching my Picard breakdown videos if you are not. I know that people online are saying they're the best Picard breakdown videos that it's on YouTube. I would not say that, of course. I would not be like that, but there are people that say they are the best Easter egg breakdown Star Trek Picard videos. So definitely, if you're not checking out those breakdown videos, you're missing out. I digress. But yeah, I really liked the concept of the Vulcan crime boss. I liked his look. He had like a green scar on his face because, of course, Vulcans have green blood. I like that he had the IDIC medal, like he was like Mr. T or something. Like he was just banging that thing like it was like a dollar sign. Like I really like that. Like I thought that the concept was really well thought out, and I liked it. Like they were all like one step ahead. Raffi had the mobile emitter, but then he's one step ahead of them, and Worf's one step of him. And I dug all that. And again, it's a nice change of pace from that high tension on the Titan. It's basically, and I pointed this out in my breakdown, it's like the movie The Thing right now. You can't trust anybody. If you're next to somebody, they leave the room, they come back, you don't know they're the same person. That's a totally different vibe that what we're getting with Worf and Raffi. So I really dig that. I think that that's one of the most successful parts of the series. Things I didn't like in this episode, I didn't really have that much. I really like this episode. You can probably tell from my reaction so far. But the only note I have about this episode that I didn't like is, why is it so easy to compromise Starfleet? I mean, so of course now we know that the Changelings have compromised Starfleet. They also did this on Deep Space Nine during the Dominion War, so they're 2 for 2. We also had Control that took over Disco. Discovery, of course, Control Disco. That sounds like a EM song or something. And then we've got the conspiracy bugs from the Next Generation. Remember those things? We see peaceful coexistence. I don't get it. Like, why is Starfleet needs Section 31? Because if they didn't, I mean, how bad would Starfleet be without Section 31? It seems like anybody could just walk in, like stroll in and put a mask on and, take over the darn thing. So yeah, that was really my only kind of quirk, is like, why is it so easy to compromise Starfleet? Maybe that's more a comment about, plotline choice. Like maybe Strange New Worlds don't have a plotline where Starfleet is compromised. Like let's let that one pass on Strange New Worlds. Let's find other stories to incorporate, into our series, because I do think that's kind of a well they go to a lot, that, and if Starfleet's supposed to be this great thing, it shouldn't be this easy to, infiltrate. But like I said, maybe that's why they need Section 31. But let me know what you thought of this episode. Like I said, I really liked it. It was my favorite episode of the season so far. I give it an A. I really didn't have any problems with it at all. I like that, they're building on the relationships a lot with Jack. I mean, we're going to talk about Jack here in a second, but I still am not a huge fan of that character. Like, nothing in this episode made me like him less, I guess I should say, which I think something happened in the prior episodes that did, so that's good. But yeah, I'd say all in all, this is a great halfway point for the season. The season has already established itself as the best season of Picard, possibly better than any season of Discovery too. But let me know what you think in the comments below. All right, so next, let's put our tinfoil hats on and talk about some Picard theories. And instead of spending the next hour talking about this, I'm really going to just center on 2 characters specifically. So first, let's talk about Jack Crusher. Obviously, something's going on with him. Every episode, he seems to get a little weirder. And then this last episode, he entered the Matrix and killed 4 changelings at once. Like, that's crazy. Just to take out 4 officers at once would be hard enough. And we've seen him take out a couple officers before, with like a single punch. But to take out 4 changelings at once, that he's obviously something. So first of all, self-promotion. I do have a video that I put out last week about a specific theory about Jack, that he is an android more like Soji and Daj from the first season of Picard, and I guess ostensibly like Picard is now. I'm not going to go into it totally, but I did think there have been some signs in this episode specifically. If you remember in the first season, when Soji and Daj were attacked, they kind of switched on and were able to like do crazy like flips and kicks and punches. And it seems like Jack has that same ability. I go into other theories as well, but that's a very strong evidence, I think, that Jack might be an android. And that, of course, would tie him to Picard quite well, because Picard is now an android. Maybe Jack Crusher is an android like Picard and Soji. Another thing that I've seen in the comments of my videos a lot is that Jack Crusher is a changeling. Mainly, I think that people think he's a changeling because this is why the other changelings, Vadic and whoever is in charge of Vadic, wants to retrieve Jack and not hurt him. The main thing for changelings is that they will not hurt another changeling. And I think that rule was probably broken during the Dominion War, but for the most part, the feeling is that changelings won't harm another changeling. So that's why it's so important to Vadic and who's ever controlling Vadic to get Jack back unharmed, is because he's a changeling. And also, there's a theory that the changelings that are operating this are not the changelings in the Great Link that we saw in the Dominion War. That this is a different group of changelings that have created another link, and possibly that this group of changelings has not been cured from the morphogenic virus that was introduced by Section 31 during the Dominion War. So if you remember at the end of that, how they were cured was Odo returned to the Great Link. So of course, any changelings that were not in the Great Link when Odo was in the Great Link did not receive that cure. And we know at least one, Laz, would have been infected by Odo because he linked with Odo, and Odo, I believe, had the virus at that time, but Laz, as far as we know, did not return to the Great Link. If you don't know who Laz is, he was a changeling that was in the Deep Space Nine episode named Chimera, I believe that's the name of the episode, where he was another one of the changelings that was like released by the changelings into the universe, like Odo was, but he did not return to the Great Link, as I said. So the theory is that maybe Jack Crusher is somehow a changeling that was, born out of that or something like that, but not sure. And then the third theory that I've seen come up is that Jack Crusher is a Pa Wraith. If you don't know what a Pa Wraith is, they're basically the bad versions of the wormhole aliens, the Bajoran prophets. And they were featured heavily in Deep Space Nine, and especially towards the end, Dukat was their emissary, basically the opposite of Cisco. Cisco was the emissary of the prophets. This Dukat became the emissary of the Pa race. But I think the main reason for this is that in the last episode, Jack Crusher's eyes lit up. And in the episode The Reckoning, I don't remember the exact name, there was an object called the Reckoning Tablet, which when was broken, a Pa Wraith got out, and the Pa Wraith, along with a Bajoran prophet, took over the bodies of Kira and Jake Sisko, and kind of like had a spiritual, like new age, like battle. It was kind of weird, but anyway, so mainly I think it's the eyes lighting up that people think that like, oh, it's a Pa Wraith. I don't think that that's good enough evidence that Jack could be a Pa Wraith just because his eyes lit up red. There's a lot of, Borg's eyes light up red. So I don't think that's the best evidence. I will say that it's always been interesting to me that the Reckoning Tablet from Deep Space Nine was in the trailer for the second season of Picard, and we never got a resolution for that. And that is just like itching at my head. They might never have a resolution to that, but it's just so weird that that tablet was in Picard's study, and we never got a resolution to that. So that's the only thing in my eyes that may tie like that the Pa race are somehow involved in the season. We never got a reason for why the Reckoning Tablet was in Picard's study in the second season trailer for Picard. So I think maybe the Pa race are somehow involved this season, but I don't know that Jack has been possessed by a Pa wraith. His visions and stuff. I don't think that really shows that, but I could be wrong. But let me know if you have any theories about what Jack Crusher could be. The next thing I want to talk about is actually an article I found on trekmovie.com. I've sung trekmovie.com's praises before. You should definitely, if you still check out websites, I don't know if the kids today still check out websites, but if you do check out websites, trekmovie.com is one of the good ones. Anyway, they have an article about different theories about who Vadic is working for. Vadic didn't show up, I believe, in the last episode, but in the episode before that, we saw that she's working for this like mysterious face that is somehow connected to the link, presumably because she cut off her hand and she's a changeling, and then she was able to talk to this person or this thing or whatever. So trekmovie.com just calls it the face. So who could be the face? Their first theory is that it's another changeling or Laz, like I mentioned earlier. And basically their theory is that Laz created another link, and that this link is now being affected still by the morphogenic virus, and now they're seeking revenge on the Federation. So specifically, they say it's possible that some members of this faction are still suffering from the morphogenic virus released by Section 31 during the Dominion War, who never got the cure because they weren't part of the Great Link. So I kind of talked about that earlier when I was talking about my theory of Jack Crusher being a changeling. So this is kind of, I guess, kind of the same kind of theory, is that, Vadic's boss is just another changeling, possibly Laz, possibly even the female changeling, although, again, that changeling was put into custody. So if it was her, they would probably know because she would not be in custody anymore. So we don't really know what's going on with that. I'm surprised they haven't brought that up yet, what happened to the female changeling, because we know that part of the Treaty of Bajor, which ended the Dominion War, was that she surrendered to the Federation or to Starfleet. So maybe we will get some kind of inkling as to what happened to the female changeling. That would be nice to know. I think that this is the most obvious way that they could go this season, with this villain being Laz or this other, link. Of course, J.G. Hertzler played Laz, and he is still a part of the Star Trek world. He's just voiced characters on Lower Decks, so they could definitely bring him back. And the fact that he's a changeling, he could just be the voice. He doesn't even have to be the character that we saw last time. So I think that this is the most likely outcome for the main villain. But again, it's also the most on the nose. So maybe if this is going to be a season where it's a lot of twists and turns, then it wouldn't be this, because again, this is the most likely outcome. So if there is twists and turns this season, it won't be it. The next possibility that TrekMovie.com brings up is the Borg. Their point is basically that since they were the ultimate Next Generation villains, and they've been mentioned so much on Picard, that of course they're going to bring them back. Honestly, I think that's a reason not to use the Borg. I think that, like the Next Generation and Voyager, and Picard to a certain extent, they've just beat the Borg into the ground. I know that the Borg are probably the most successful villains in the history of Star Trek. I'm not talking about single villain. I'm talking about like race of villains and, reoccurring villains. I think that the Borg probably win, because I don't know if you can call the Klingons really villains. Of course, they were early on, but since the Next Generation on, they're sometimes villains and sometimes allies. So, but I don't know about this one either, because again, I think that the Borg have just been driven into the ground with being used just too many times. We had that comment from Shaw about the remnants of the real Borg being out there somewhere, and that he doesn't care about the crazy stuff that happened on the Stargazer, meaning the Jurati Borg or whatever they're called. So the real Borg are supposed to be still out there. But I think in the first season of Picard, Jurati also made a comment that after Janeway future Janeway released the neurolytic pathogen into their systems, I think that the Borg are still crippled. But maybe they're not, with a villain like that. Like maybe they're going to come back. And we've already seen how important the Borg are to the history of Picard. I don't think we actually need to see them. So I don't know that I would like to see the Borg as the villain. It doesn't seem very Borg to like have Vadic working for them. I mean, the Borg are a force of nature. They're not, they're not things that work behind the scenes. They're a hurricane, just coming at you. I don't think it's the Borg, but it's an interesting theory. The next theory is one that I hadn't really thought of before reading this, and that's the Remans. If you're not familiar with the Remans were, I think they were introduced in the film Nemesis. They are in the same kind of species as Romulans, but they're different, and they lived on a different planet or moon, I think, named Remus. And the biggest clue that it could be the Remans are, for one, before Vadic talks to the face, she cuts off her hand using a jackal knife, and the jackal knife is what Shinzon used in the movie Nemesis. Now, me personally, I think that's putting a lot of weight on a prop. I mean, I do Easter egg and breakdown videos, so I know all about like trying to, expound on something little. But just because she uses the knife, I don't know that that's a clue that the Remans are involved. The next thing they say, though, is interesting, that the face that Vadic speaks with, it does kind of look like a Reman face. I didn't think about it at first, but when I went back and looked, it does kind of look like it has like the big eye sockets and stuff. So I think that it does kind of look like a Reman face. So maybe it is. I mean, Remus was destroyed with Romulus, when Romulus was destroyed in the Hobus supernova. So we've heard a lot about the Romulans on Picard. Obviously, they were a big part of season 1. We haven't really heard anything about the Remans, I don't think. So maybe the Remans are trying to have revenge on the Federation because they tried to help the Romulans and not them. I think that's definitely plausible. I think that would make sense. It ties back to the movies. It ties back to the last movie that the Next Generation crew was in. So I could definitely see somehow the Remans being involved. I don't know if they're the big bad, because the Remans were always shown to be the pawns of somebody else too. So I don't know if they can, level up and start to be the big bad. But it's an interesting theory, I think, especially when you think about how closely the face looks to a Reman face. And then their next possibility is that Lore is pulling the strings. Now, Lore, of course, will be played by Brent Spiner. He is Data's brother. We know that he will show up this season. We've seen him in multiple trailers, and we've seen him talk, directly to Picard in one of those trailers. It's also worth noting that in his past stories, he's worked with the crystalline entity. He's worked with like a faction of the Borg. So he does have a history of like reaching out to other things and other people and having them like do his bidding and work with him. So there is some meat on the bone here to this theory. I don't think it's Lore, though. I think, The more likely thing, and I mentioned this in my breakdown from the last episode, is that I think when they mentioned in the last episode that Daystrom is guarded by an I think that Lore is that AI, and I think that Moriarty will be the thing that beats Lore, because Moriarty, of course, Professor Moriarty, the hologram, was created in the TNG episode Elementary My Dear Data as a way to defeat Data. So it makes sense that he'd be able to defeat Lore and he'd be able to get past the security at Daystrom Station. So I think that that's how Lore will work into the season. So in my opinion, I don't think that it will be Lore, but I guess it is kind of an interesting theory. And then this next one, I don't know. I don't think it holds a lot of water. That it could be Section 31 that's pulling the strings. They say that could Section 31 be using a new strain of the morphogenic virus to control Vadic and the other changelings? Are they being used as part of a larger plan, possibly a coup, like for Section 31 to take over Starfleet? So again, I just mentioned, how easy it is to infiltrate Starfleet. To have Section 31 want to take over Starfleet again, that'd be kind of crazy. It's like there's just like a revolving door in Starfleet, like it's just that easy to take over. I don't know. But, I don't know. Section 31 has always worked in Starfleet's best interests. The only way I could see them doing something like this is like a false flag operation where they want to start a war with somebody else. So they're creating a villain. But I don't know. I think that Vadic and who's ever controlling Vadic seems to have a specific reason for Jack. And I don't know why Section 31 would go through all this to get Jack. I think if they wanted Jack, they'd have a lot easier ways to get him than using changelings and, getting the Titan all the way out to the edge of the galaxy. I think that Section 31 has always been a covert operation. So this isn't very covert what we're doing. Even Dr. Crusher mentioned that the Shrike is hardly a bounty ship. It's a huge ship, so I don't know. I don't think it could be Section 31. But this next one, I actually brought up, I think in my podcast last week, that I would love for the person controlling Vadic to be Future Guy from the Enterprise, Star Trek Enterprise. If you watch that series, he was kind of this guy in the background that was controlling the Suliban. And I don't think he was in the final season because I think that they wrote that plot line out. But we never really did find out who Future Guy was. And on Enterprise, the main villain would talk with Future Guy in a kind of similar, not in the exact same way, but like they talked through a view screen because the Future Guy was in the 28th century. So having said that, it kind of could mean that Future Guy is not a part of the season because they're not in the 28th century. So he would still be in the future, or maybe he came back. I don't know. But I think that it would be cool. They keep talking about Frontier Day, and Frontier Day is supposed to be basically the final episode of Enterprise, which is the launch of Starfleet and the Federation. So, maybe that's how they're going to tie it all together. I would love any connections to Enterprise. I'd love to see Future Guy, show up this season. Of all these, this is the one I want it to be. It's not the one I think it's going to be, but if it was Future Guy, this is the one out of all these that I'd be, running up and down my hallway being like, yes, what a good choice, like in super nerd mode. I don't know. Another thing is that Terry Metalis worked on Enterprise, so he's very familiar with that storyline, of course. But we'll see. But like I said, my fingers are crossed for Future Guy, but I'm not holding my breath. The next character they bring up is a very interesting one. That's Gul Dukat. Now, if you're saying, wait a minute, Gul Dukat died, spoiler alert, in the last episode of Deep Space Nine. He was taken over by the Pa Wraiths, so you can't, you could always have a retcon where it's that somehow Palpatine return thing where they can, bring up evil character back just because he's so evil that his soul brought him back. And again, it ties into the Red Eyes kind of thing with Jack Crusher. But I don't know. I think it would be cool. It would be cool to see the actor who played Gul Dukat. I'm going to say his name wrong. I think it's Mark Alamo. I'm not 100% sure, but he was great as Gul Dukat. Probably one of the best single villains on any Star Trek series. And if you're wondering how old he is, I believe he's 2 years younger than Sir Patrick Stewart. So even though I don't think he's acting anymore, they could bring him back, especially if it's just a voice on a view screen and it's under heavy prosthetics. I would love to see him come back, but again, I think it's too out there. We did get a Gul Dukat shout out in season 2 of Picard. His skull was one of the skulls in that room of all the people that Picard killed in the alternate universe. But I don't know. I think that since he's not a TNG villain, it would be kind of weird to make a non-TNG villain the final villain for the Next Generation crew. While I would love to see him come back, I don't believe we will see Gul Dukat return this season. And then this last one is kind of just there to be funny that it could be Armis. If you remember, Armis was the oil slick creature that killed Tasha Yar in the first season that was supposed to be all evil, but like this was before CGI and stuff. And yeah, it didn't, it's kind of like, that's one of the aspects of the Next Generation that doesn't really translate well to future years because yeah, Armis just looks like a big guy in like an oil slick costume. And he did show up on Lower Decks. I know at least one episode, maybe even two. But yeah, that would be funny to bring back some obscure villain from Next Generation and make him, much more powerful this season. I know there are quite a few Ferengi that Picard had issues with during the Next Generation. But let me know, who do you think is pulling the strings behind Vadic this season? Do you think it could be any of the ones I mentioned? Do you have a new idea out there? Like I mentioned, I think really the first one I said, that it's just another pool of changelings, that possibly it's Laz. I'd like to see it be Laz. I mean, again, that kind of goes against what I said about the final villains of the Next Generation not being featured in the final season of Picard. But I think if they do it well, I think it could resonate with all fans of Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. But let me know, who do you think is controlling Vadic behind the scenes? So next, let's talk about another sci-fi series. That's the Orville. Fans like myself of this series are waiting for any news, basically, good or bad. And we already know that since they're not filming and have no plans to film in 2023, that we won't be seeing a season 4 in 23 or 2024. So that's at least 2 more years without the Orville. But finally, we have one speck of good news, and that comes from Chad Coleman. He appears as Clyden on the Orville, and although his character is not that likable, the man himself seems very likable. I seem to be watching shows with him in it all the time. Right now, I'm watching Superman and Lois, and he's a villain this season. I know most people remember him from The Walking Dead. On Orville, he's good. I mean, he plays a good kind of villain most of the time, as Clyden, Bortus's mate or partner, or whatever you want to call it, on again, off again. I think he's a great actor, but he seems like a really good guy too in all the interviews I've seen with him. But anyway, this is what he had to say about the future of the Orville, and this is from the website Red Shirts Always Die, which I know has been around for a while, but I seem to be checking more and more. So if you're looking for another website about Star Trek, I think Red Shirts Always Die is a good one too. So this is what Chad Coleman said about the future of the Orville. We're in the loop and out of the loop. We think it's going to happen, but it's still up in the air. There's so much going on with all these studios that it's just like, well, we got to settle this thing first, then we can really decide on that thing. A bunch of that is going on. We hope so. Seth has an amazing relationship with Dana and with Disney, who's running it now. And they said they've had promising meetings, so we'll see. The Dana that he's talking about is Dana Walden, who is the chairman, I believe, of Disney, and who survived the Disney-Fox merger, which I thought was very interesting. But I think that what Mr. Coleman is talking about right now, when he says we got to settle this thing first, then we can decide on that thing, he is specifically talking about the TED series that Seth MacFarlane created and is also writing and is also directing and is also starring in. So Seth MacFarlane just wasn't busy enough that he created a TV series based on a character that was in 2 films in the 2000s named Ted. If you don't know, it's about this teddy bear that basically comes to life and is really like profane and stuff like that. So the series is going to be a prequel to that movie, so it won't have Mark Wahlberg or anybody else that was in the movies. It'll basically be Mark Wahlberg's character as a kid. This series is coming out this year on Peacock, and it's another series where like Seth MacFarlane is involved in everything. And this is on top of him voicing characters in The Family Guy, American Dad, and Robot Chicken. And these are all series that in the past he either created or like wrote on, directed, and he's had to take steps back because of all this work. So I think that the problem here is that Seth MacFarlane is just too damn busy. He's just got too many things going on. And with this TED series coming out, I think that they're going to do a wait and see. They're going to see this first season, how it resonates with an audience. And if it's popular and gets more seasons, I think the Orville is dead. I think if Ted gets a season 2, you can pretty much write off the Orville. And if you're thinking, well, why doesn't Seth MacFarlane do like he does with American Dad and Family Guy? and just play Ed Mercer, don't direct, don't write, don't worry about the storylines, just come in and act. From articles that I've seen about Seth MacFarlane and interviews that he's done, one of the constants is that one of his favorite things about the Orville is that it's his first time to develop characters over many seasons. And if you watch the third season of the Orville, that's true because every episode in that season had something that had like a story or a character development or something that had to do before that. I mean, I know I was on a podcast where I made the comment that there's no way you could watch the third season of the Orville without watching the first two because there's so much development and so many stories that are touched on again. So it's obvious that that's something that Seth MacFarlane wants to do. So if you take that away, then I don't know. I mean, Seth MacFarlane obviously does not need a paycheck. He's got 62 jobs. So I think that you really need Ted to fail. If you're an Orville fan, I think you're just hoping that Ted fails. That's the brass tacks of it. I don't see how Seth MacFarlane does all this with the Orville and Ted and Family Guy and American Dad and Robot Chicken and whatever else he's got going on. I think that that's really the problem here with the future of the Orville. I know that the ratings have been good. I know that it's always in the top 10 shows watched on Disney Plus. There's no other series on Disney Plus like it. So I think that the only way that it has a future is if Ted doesn't, which is kind of morbid, but Ted's kind of a morbid show. So maybe it fits, but let me know, what are your feelings on the Orville? Do you want to see a fourth season? Do you think that it ended with the third season and that's fine? Did you not watch the third season? Did it lose you in the third season? I know it did for a lot of people. I didn't particularly care for the third season. I've been able to sit with it longer, the third season, and the tone change is not such a shock to me, but I still think that it's the weakest season of the three and I miss the comedy. So if it's going to continue like that, I don't know, maybe I don't need to see the Orville anymore, but let me know, what do you think about the Orville and do you want to see more of it? All right, so next let's talk about The Last of Us. And now that the first season is done, and by the way, spoilers for the first season of The Last of Us, if you have not seen it, go ahead and skip forward. In my opinion, I really liked the first season. The finale was probably my least favorite episode of the entire season, just because it was so beat for beat with the game. It even, I think, left something out from the game, but for the most part, the season in itself was best when it was expounded on things from the game. It would take part of the game and show us, the past or make it, more exciting or change a character up so they're more, they're more in the story. And the finale didn't really have that. It really just was like beat for beat with the game. So, having played the game, I wasn't shocked by it. And I was just like, whatever. But a lot of people did like it. And it looks like episode 9 of The Last of Us was watched by 8.2 million people and broke a viewership record, its own viewership record for the streaming series HBO Max. And this is considering that the finale was released during ABC's telecast of the Oscars. I know I saw one person say, it was stupid for The Last of Us to have their finale on the same date as the Oscars. And I guess they're the stupid ones because it didn't seem to slow down The Last of Us at all. And if I remember correctly, the 4th episode of The Last of Us was released when the Grammys were on, and I don't think it slowed them down at all. So since the finale, the series has announced that the show will have a second season and that the second game will be longer than just one season. I know that that's one thing that I was worried about, that since the first season showed all the events of the first game, would the second season just show all the events of the second game and then that's it? They said that no, they're going to do the same thing and kind of expound on things and make it a longer narrative. One thing I know that they could do is that between the first and second game, I think 5 years pass that we don't see. So, maybe that's the next season. Maybe the next season is the 5 years that we haven't seen in the game. Or maybe we'll get flashbacks, during events that we have seen in the game. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm really interested to see how the popularity is affected by the events that happen. I'm not going to spoil what happens in the second game of The Last of Us, but some crazy, crazy stuff happens. And I don't know how it's going to be, people that haven't played the game, I don't know how they're going to be affected by it. I think that it might lose some viewers with what happens, because I know that a lot of people weren't happy when the game was released, what happened to some of the characters. So we'll see if that happens to the series. I think critically, the first season of The Last of Us was a success as well. That's hard for me to say for some reason. I think that the one thing that I've heard people talk about that they didn't like is that the show needed more zombies or clickers, as they're called in the show. But, I don't agree with that. The series isn't about zombies, it really is about the people. I know that the creators of The Walking Dead always said that, but it didn't really feel like that. There's a lot of scenes in The Walking Dead where the zombies are just like on the other side of a fence or on the other side of like a gate or something like that, and they're just walking around. And you lose the impact when you see things all the time like that, and they're not as scary. And we had that one bloater zombie, and we had that one kid zombie that was all freaky and rolling around. I think if you have more and more of them, they lose their impact. It's like Spielberg with Jaws, and only showing the shark when he had to, and that made the shark that much more scary. And I think that that's the best way to handle this series, because the acting is so good that you don't need the big explosions and the Michael Bay action scenes to kind of get us through to the next episode, because really it's about characters. We really delve into these characters, how their relationships are built, how they're built on trauma, how they respond to trauma. And, it's not about the zombies. It's not about the clickers. The clickers are just part of the environment. The people are really the danger. And I think that really comes through in The Last of Us. So I don't think that that's a fair criticism. And I know that, some people that play the game, you might be used to seeing more clickers, but that's a video game. I mean, you can't have, if you have this much character development in a video game, it's not going to be as popular. You want to, shoot them up. So I think that that's what people might have been expecting on the series too. And it doesn't make sense. But so I don't think that's a fair criticism, but let me know, would you like to see more clickers? And then finally, I want to talk about kind of the question that everybody talks about after seeing the last episode. And again, spoilers, was Joel right? In the last episode, he finds out that after, the whole season of trying to get Ellie to the Fireflies in this hospital, that after they get there, he finds out that they're going to kill Ellie to possibly get the cure, that it's in her brain. So she has to die to get it out. So what Joel does is he kills everybody. Basically, he just goes beast mode and just turns on all the cheat codes and just mows through the hospital, everybody, the doctor, even Marlene, who is the head of the Fireflies, just to save Ellie. So was Joel right to do that when, the fate of humanity is on the line, but also Joel has now established this relationship with Elle where, they're basically, father and daughter at this point. So speaking as a parent, it's hard to take that part out of it. And if I look at my kids and you tell me, the fate of humanity rests on us killing your kid and taking something from their brain, my answer is humanity's screwed. I'm not letting you touch my kid. I don't care, about humanity when it comes to my kids. But especially if you realize that this doctor, he doesn't know that he could get this cure. It's not a done deal. Obviously, he's never created this cure before. And how horrible would it be to have sacrificed Ellie and then, oh, the cure doesn't work. I was wrong, dude. Like I dropped a sample or something, like I had mushrooms and now I'm a clicker, like so many things could happen that just because Ellie makes a sacrifice, that doesn't mean that the cure would have been found. So from that point of view, like I think that Joel was right. But really, the only way this really goes right is if you give Ellie agency over the decision. Like if you tell her, okay, we're going to have to kill you to get this cure, and she says, all right, I'll make that sacrifice. I think that's a different argument. If you watch the episode and the same thing happens in the game, the Fireflies lie to her. They say, oh, we're just going to put you out to do some tests, knowing full well that they're going to kill her. So the Fireflies messed it up from the beginning. So as soon as they do that, like Joel is right, because Ellie doesn't have the choice. It's not like they can wake her up at that point and say, what do you want to do? And, I know that some people make the argument, she's just a kid. She shouldn't even have agency over the decision. But at this point, she's killed people. She's seen people die. So at this point, I think she does have the ability to make the decision of, does she want to make the sacrifice or not? But she definitely doesn't deserve to have somebody make that decision for her. So like I said, in my mind, Joel was right because the Fireflies were wrong first. And like I said, it's not like Joel could have woke her up after killing everyone and getting to her and been like, oh, okay, you want to die? Okay, so, like everything's fine now. Like, no, like once Joel like makes that decision, it's on. and it is what it is. I mean, I think that I liked how the show was very faithful to the game and that they didn't pull any punches. And it looks like it's going to go the same way in the second season. So let me know if you watched The Last of Us, what you thought of the final episode, what you thought of the first season. Do you think it deserves to be as popular as it is? And are you excited for future seasons? So now let's talk about a show that is surprisingly not as successful now as The Last of Us, and that is The Mandalorian, who seemed to be a juggernaut in its first 2 seasons. And you can make the argument that it kind of carried the series Book of Boba Fett, but it's having some problems in its 3rd season. The last episode, the 3rd episode, was its lowest rated episode ever. And I would have to agree. I was not a big fan of that episode. And it's funny because while I was watching it, I was like, man, this feels more like an episode of Andor than it does The Mandalorian. And as soon as I was done watching the episode, I go online and everybody's saying the same thing. And I even saw a graphic of somebody like changed the letters in Mandalorian and it said like Man Andor Lorian or something. So it's like the name Andor in Mandalorian. But yeah, if you watch this channel, I'm not a fan of Andor. So I did not like this episode either. I don't have a bad feeling about the season as a whole. I think this will be one of those seasons that's really like lore heavy. And I think if you're like into the fantasy aspect of Star Wars, I think that you'll like it. I think that we're going to get a lot of exposition about like things that happen to the Mandalorians and the culture. And it looks like Bo-Katan is starting to become like more a Mandalorian, and Baby Yoda or Grogu, whatever you call him, is becoming a Mandalorian. So it looks like it's going to be lore heavy, and I'm okay with that. I like stuff like that, but I could understand how it would lose some like casual Star Wars fans. I still think it's better than Andor, but I can understand why people didn't like the last episode because it did feel so like disjointed. Like the A and B plot had nothing to do with one another, and it's really odd to see that. Or as far as we know, they have nothing to do. Obviously we haven't seen the full season yet, but they seemed like they had nothing to do with one another. And it kind of reminded me about the Book of Boba Fett and how some of those episodes felt like they were episodes of The Mandalorian. So maybe that's just more of a comment about how they're building these seasons. And sometimes maybe the interconnectivity is becoming a problem and you lose one series when you kind of meld into the other one or something like that. I don't know. But another thing that people are bringing up is their Star Wars fatigue. In the last few months, I know a couple of movies that Star Wars was supposed to put out, they canceled. And I think that the series they're supposed to put out, Acolyte, has some kind of legal problem now, like somebody suing them over some rights. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know I read a story about that. Anyway, so Star Wars looks like they're having some problems right now. Andor, while it was a critical success, I don't think a lot of fans liked it, and the viewership numbers were definitely not there. And then we had Kenobi that did have good viewer numbers. I think that was the last Star Wars thing to kind of have good numbers, but critically, I think you would call it a failure. And I think fans are kind of split on it. I'm kind of split on it myself. There were parts of that series I really liked, and then there were parts I thought kind of dragged. But I thought it was kind of I definitely think it was better than the way it was reviewed. But this could be a sign of some Star Wars fatigue. I know that there's rumors that Star Wars is releasing details about a new movie in April, in next month. So we could see that, but I don't know. Star Wars also has the animated series, The Bad Batch, and I actually stopped watching that series. I liked it at first, but I don't know, somehow they lost me. I don't know, somewhere in this season they lost me, and I never really wanted to watch the episodes again, and I stopped watching halfway through. So yeah, I don't know if maybe I'm feeling that fatigue too. Like maybe I just, because I know I didn't like Andor, but I still like Mandalorian. But let me know, what do you feel about Star Wars? I mean, I know mostly I have Star Trek fans on this channel, but let me know, do you like Star Wars? And how do you, think that The Mandalorian is so far this season? Do you think it's the worst season so far? Or do you think that people are just being hypercritical? And then finally, I want to talk about this 3rd season of Picard as a whole, and if it has been a success so far. I mean, now we just hit the 5th episode, so we are officially at the halfway point. It's all downhill from here. I would say that, first of all, if you talk about if a show is successful, you got to put critical ratings in one bucket and viewership in another bucket. And with Star Trek, you kind of got to put fan response in another bucket. So first, let's talk about the critical ratings. I think that really there is no conversation there. I think that critically, the third season of Picard is an overwhelming success. I know that on Rotten Tomatoes, on IMDb, everywhere, it's got the best ratings of any season of Picard and some of the best ratings of Star Trek. And it's well deserved. I think that it's a really good season. So far, I already mentioned how it's my favorite season of the show, and I like where it's going. It's not without its problems, but they're few and far between at this point. But I think that as a whole, critically, it's doing very well. If we want to segue then into, like I said, the bucket of Star Trek fandom and how they're reacting, I think that the fandom has reacted surprisingly well. You know, after so much of the fandom was against Picard's second season, I think it was hard to bring them back into the fold, and maybe some people haven't yet. But I think that as a whole, you know, I've been surprised some of the channels that were bashing Star Trek, you know, months ago or years ago, are now, you know, back on the bandwagon, which I find interesting. But so, you know, I think that the fandom has accepted this third season of Picard. I think that at least as much as the first season of Strange New World, fans enjoyed the first season of Strange New Worlds, and I think they're enjoying the third season of Picard just as much. But as far as viewership goes, I think that Picard has underwhelmed. You know, it's hard to find streaming numbers and how successful a show is. I looked pretty hard to try and find like a definitive number. And what I found was that Picard is popular for a Paramount Plus show. But as far as in the zeitgeist of, you know, series like Last of Us, Mandalorian, you know, everything out there, it's kind of middle of the road when it comes to viewership, which is disappointing. But part of me thinks that you know, in this world of streaming and the fact that Picard is a serialized story, we might see a lot of people binge it after the season is over. Especially if the ratings continue, the critical ratings continue to be so good and people continue to say how good the show is. I think that we could, you know, it might get a bump with people just wanting to binge the whole season. And I can understand that, especially if you're just a casual fan. I think that this would be a good series to binge. So I could definitely see why people would do that. But yeah, I don't know. You know, people talk about the future of Star Trek. Are they going to give Terry Matalas something else? Are they going to give Jonathan Frakes something else? I don't know if the viewership is enough to sustain that. I know that a lot of people are talking about now, you know, they could do a series based on the Titan. As much as I love Todd Stashwick as Captain Shaw, and I love Todd Stashwick as Captain Shaw, I don't think that he could carry a show. I don't think that he or Jerry Ryan have the, you know, the cachet to be the lead on a show. You know, you would have to like throw in Michelle Yeoh somehow, you know, as the security officer on the Titan or something. You know, you'd have to throw somebody else with a name on that show to kind of make it happen. But the characters on the Titan are good. I have kind of noticed how I like the bridge crew on the Titan more. I'm not sure though, in the last episode, some of them got beamed off. I know that Rose said that she had the crew of the Titan beamed to the other ship, but then LaForge was still the pilot, and then there was a couple other bridge crew members still there. So I don't know how much of the bridge crew is still on the Titan, but yeah, I don't think that, you know, as good as the stories might be, I don't think that Todd Stashwick and Jerry Ryan could be, you know, people starring in a series. But, you know, I hope that people do come around and watch Picard. I think that this is a good season, and hopefully the viewership will reflect those numbers. But let me know, what do you think so far of the third season of Picard? Do you think it's a success? Do you think that we shouldn't care about viewership? You know, say what you will about viewership numbers. That's what companies look at to make decisions as far as, will there be more series? Will these actors, directors, whatever, get more chances to make more content? So the viewer numbers have to be there for there to be more Star Trek. And right now, it doesn't seem like season 3 is doing that, which is a shame. So hopefully people come around. Hopefully when the season's over, people come around even more. But let me know, are you disappointed by this? What do you think of the third season of Picard so far? And would you like to see a show based on the Titan? Well, that's all I have this time. Thank you very much for joining me. Remember, the best way to support me is to hit that like button to help my videos get out to more people. And you can also hit that subscribe button so you know when my videos come out. Thank you very much for clicking on this video, and I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?